The bruise on Theresa Everett's left cheekbone had turned a sickly yellow-green by the time she decided her husband would not change, that his promises meant nothing, and that if she stayed another week, she might not survive to see 21. She waited until Samuel's snoring rattled the rafters of their cramped room above the Mercantile in Independence, Missouri, then slipped from beneath the threadbare quilt with the practiced silence of someone who had learned to move like smoke. Her hands trembled as she folded the only good dress she owned, a simple blue cotton she had worn on her wedding day 2 years prior, and tucked it into a worn carpetbag alongside a hairbrush. A few coins she had been hiding in a jar behind loose floorboards, and a photograph of her mother who had died when Theresa was just 17. She did not take the silver locket Samuel had given her as a wedding gift because it felt like wearing chains, and she was done being bound to a man whose love came with fists. The stairs creaked under her weight, each sound like a gunshot in the pre-dawn silence of early May 1876, but Samuel did not stir. He never did when he had been drinking, and he had been drinking heavily that night after losing money in a card game. Theresa pushed open the back door of the Mercantile and stepped into the cool Missouri air, the sky still dark, but beginning to pale at the eastern horizon. She had no plan beyond walking, putting one foot in front of the other, heading west where the land opened up, and a woman might disappear into the vastness of the frontier. She had heard stories of wagon trains and settlements, of women who had made new lives for themselves in places where the past could not reach them, and she clung to those stories like lifelines as she made her way down the muddy street toward the edge of town. The road stretched before her, rutted from recent spring rains, lined with scrubby vegetation that swayed in the breeze. Theresa walked for hours as the sun climbed higher, her feet already beginning to blister inside her only pair of shoes. She had not thought to bring food or water, had not planned anything beyond escape, and now as the morning wore on and the temperature rose, she began to understand how unprepared she truly was. But turning back was not an option. Samuel would be awake by now, would have discovered her absence, and if he found her, he would make sure she never tried to leave again. So she kept walking, her carpetbag growing heavier with each mile, her throat dry and aching, her vision blurring with exhaustion and fear, and something that might have been hope if she allowed herself to feel it. She was perhaps 15 miles west of Independence when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Panic seized her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. She turned, expecting to see Samuel on a borrowed horse, his face twisted with rage, but instead she saw a lone rider approaching at an easy canter. The man sat tall in the saddle, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low against the morning sun, his horse a sturdy roan that looked like it could run forever. Theresa stood frozen in the middle of the road, uncertain whether to run or stand her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs. The rider slowed as he approached, then pulled his horse to a stop a few yards away. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face that was younger than Theresa had expected, perhaps 24 or 25, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. There was a gentleness in those eyes that surprised her, a softness that seemed at odds with the dust-covered clothing and the well-worn gun belt slung low on his hips. "Madam," he said, his voice low and rough like gravel underfoot, "you look like you could use some help." Theresa wanted to say she was fine, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but her knees chose that moment to buckle and she swayed on her feet. The cowboy was off his horse in an instant, catching her elbow to steady her, his grip firm but careful. Up close, she could see the concern etched in the lines around his mouth, the way his brow furrowed as he took in her bruised face and the desperate exhaustion written in every line of her body. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "Yesterday morning," Theresa admitted, her voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. He nodded as if this confirmed something he had already suspected, then reached for his saddlebag and pulled out a canteen and a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Drink slow," he instructed, handing her the canteen. "Then have some of this jerky. It is not fancy, but it will help." Theresa drank, forcing herself to take small sips even though she wanted to drain the entire canteen. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal, but it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. She chewed the jerky slowly, feeling strength begin to seep back into her limbs, awareness returning to her foggy mind. The cowboy waited patiently, holding his horse's reins, not pressing her with questions or demanding explanations. "I am Finn Quinlan," he said finally. "I have been working a ranch about 40 miles west of here, but I am heading toward Kansas to meet up with a cattle drive." "Where are you headed?" "Away," Theresa said, and there must have been something in her voice because Finn's expression shifted, understanding replacing curiosity. "Someone hurt you," he said, and it was not a question. Theresa nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "My husband. I left while he was sleeping. I know he will come looking for me." Finn was quiet for a long moment, and when Theresa finally dared to look at him, she saw a hardness in his jaw that had not been there before, a tension in his shoulders that spoke of controlled anger. "How far back is he?" "Independence. I have been walking since before dawn." "He will not catch you if you are with me," Finn said with quiet certainty. "My horse can carry us both, and we can put a lot of miles between you and that town before nightfall. I can take you to a settlement where you will be safe, where you can start over." He paused, then added, "If that is what you want." Theresa looked into those storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but honest concern, no hidden motives or dangerous promises. She thought of Samuel waking up angry, thought of him riding west with violence in his heart, thought of being alone and vulnerable on this endless road. Then she thought of this stranger who had stopped to help her, who offered protection without asking for anything in return, and made her decision. "Yes," she said. "Please, I want to go." Finn helped her into the saddle, then swung up behind her, one arm settling around her waist to keep her steady. Theresa stiffened at the contact, years of Samuel's unpredictable moods making her wary of any man's touch. But Finn's hold was respectful, impersonal, meant only to keep her from falling. He clicked his tongue, and the roan started forward at a steady trot that ate up the miles without exhausting the horse. They rode in silence for the first hour, Theresa too overwhelmed to make conversation, and Finn seeming to understand her need for quiet. The landscape rolled past, open prairie dotted with wildflowers, occasional stands of trees marking creeks and streams. The sun climbed higher, warming the air until Theresa could feel sweat trickling down her back, but it was nothing compared to the fierce sweat that had soaked her clothes during her long walk. She was acutely aware of Finn behind her, the solid warmth of his chest against her shoulder blades, the easy confidence with which he guided the horse. He smelled of leather and horse and honest sweat, nothing like the sour whiskey stench that had clung to Samuel. "What is your name?" Finn asked as they slowed to give the horse a rest. "Theresa Everett," she said, then hesitated before adding, "though I suppose I should stop using Everett. That was his name, not mine. I was Theresa Emmett before I married." "Theresa," Finn repeated as if testing how it sounded. "It suits you. And for what it is worth, you have every right to choose what name you want to be called." They stopped at midday beside a creek where the horse could drink and rest. Finn helped Theresa down, his hands on her waist lingering only long enough to ensure she had her balance, then busied himself with tending to his horse. Theresa knelt by the water and splashed her face, washing away the dust and grime of the morning's journey. When she looked up, she caught Finn watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something soft and almost tender that made her heart skip in a way that was entirely unfamiliar. "We should keep moving," he said, looking away quickly. "I want to make it to Fort Larned by tomorrow evening. There is a settlement nearby where I know some good people who can help you get situated." They rode through the afternoon, and as the miles passed, Theresa found herself relaxing against Finn's chest, her exhaustion finally catching up with her. She dozed in the saddle, waking occasionally when the horse shifted gait or when Finn adjusted his hold on her. Each time she woke, she felt safer than the time before, the fear that had been her constant companion for 2 years beginning to loosen its grip. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Finn guided the horse off the main trail toward a cluster of cottonwood trees. "We will camp here for the night," he said. "There is water and good grass for the horse, and the trees will hide our fire." He helped Theresa down, then set about making camp with practiced efficiency. He unsaddled the roan and hobbled it where it could graze, then gathered wood for a fire. Theresa watched, feeling useless and uncertain until Finn noticed her standing awkwardly to the side. "There is a bedroll tied to the saddle," he said gently. "You should rest. You have been through a lot today." "What about you?" Theresa asked. "I will be fine. I have slept on the ground more times than I can count." He struck a match and lit the kindling, coaxing the flames to life. "Besides, you need the sleep more than I do." Theresa wanted to argue, but her body was screaming for rest. She retrieved the bedroll and spread it near the fire, then sat down with a sigh that seemed to come from her very bones. Finn produced more jerky and some hardtack from his saddlebag, along with a tin pot he filled with water from the creek. He set the pot near the fire to heat, then sat across from Theresa, the flames dancing between them. "Can I ask you something?" Theresa said after they had eaten in comfortable silence. "Of course." "Why did you stop for me? Most men would have just ridden past." Finn was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion barely held in check. "My mother was in a situation like yours once, before I was born. She was married to a man who hurt her, who made her life hell. One day she ran, and a stranger helped her get away. She always told me that if I ever saw someone who needed help, I should be that stranger. I should be the person who stops." He looked up, meeting Theresa's eyes across the fire. "I am just glad I came along when I did." Theresa felt tears prick her eyes, the first tears she had allowed herself since leaving Independence. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life today." "You saved your own life," Finn said firmly. "You were the one brave enough to leave. I just gave you a ride." They talked long into the night, Finn sharing stories of his life on the ranch, of growing up with his mother who had eventually married a good man and found happiness. Theresa talked about her own childhood, about losing her mother and falling for Samuel's charm, before discovering the monster beneath. She had never spoken so openly about her marriage, had never had anyone who listened without judgment or pity, and it felt like lancing a wound, painful but necessary. When Theresa finally laid down to sleep, Finn took up a position on the other side of the fire, his saddle serving as a pillow, his rifle close at hand. "Sleep well, Theresa," he said softly. "You are safe here." And for the first time in years, Theresa believed it. She woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the soft sounds of Finn moving around the camp. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the world in soft pinks and golds. Theresa sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory rushed back. She was not in Independence anymore. She was free. "Morning," Finn said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," Theresa admitted, accepting the cup gratefully. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she drank it eagerly, welcoming the warmth that spread through her chest. They broke camp quickly and were back on the trail as the sun cleared the horizon. The day was cooler than the previous one, with clouds building in the west that promised rain by evening. Finn kept the horse at a steady pace, covering ground efficiently while still being mindful of Theresa's comfort. She found herself leaning into him more naturally now, the stiffness of the previous day gone, replaced by a growing sense of trust. "Tell me about Fort Larned," Theresa said as they rode. "What is it like?" "It is a military fort, been there since the 50s, Finn explained. Protects travelers on the Santa Fe Trail. There is a settlement nearby that has grown up around it with decent folks trying to make an honest living. I know a woman there, Martha Patterson, who runs a boarding house. She is always looking for help, and she is the kind of person who does not ask too many questions about a person's past. You think she would take me on?" "I think she would be lucky to have you," Finn said, and Theresa heard the sincerity in his voice. "You could work for her, earn your own money, build your own life. And if that is not what you want, there are other opportunities. The frontier needs teachers, seamstresses, cooks. You could do anything you set your mind to." The idea was so foreign, so impossibly hopeful, that Theresa almost could not process it. She had spent 2 years believing she was trapped, that there was no escape from the life Samuel had forced on her. Now here was Finn, speaking of possibilities and futures as if they were real things she could actually grasp. "What about you?" Theresa asked. "You said you were heading to Kansas for a cattle drive." "I was," Finn said slowly, "but I am thinking maybe I will stick around Fort Larned for a while. There is always work for a man who knows horses and cattle, and the pay is decent." He paused, then added quietly, "Besides, I would like to make sure you get settled properly. Make sure you are really safe." Theresa's heart did a strange flip in her chest. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at not being abandoned in a strange place. But there was something more beneath it, something warm and bright that she was afraid to examine too closely. They rode on, the miles disappearing beneath the roan's steady hooves. Around midday, they passed a small wagon train heading east, families returning from failed homesteads or heading back to visit relatives. Finn raised a hand in greeting, and the wagon master nodded back, his eyes lingering on Theresa with curiosity but no hostility. It reminded her that the world was bigger than Independence, bigger than Samuel's fists and cruel words. Out here, no one knew her as Samuel Everett's wife. Out here, she could be anyone. The rain started in the late afternoon, a gentle drizzle that quickly turned into a steady downpour. Finn pulled a slicker from his saddlebag and draped it over Theresa's shoulders, seemingly unconcerned about getting soaked himself. They pushed on through the rain, Finn's arm tightening around Theresa's waist to keep her steady as the trail turned to mud beneath them. "There is an abandoned soddy about 2 miles ahead," Finn shouted over the sound of the rain. "We can wait out the worst of the storm there." The soddy turned out to be a half-collapsed structure with a sagging roof, but it was dry inside and out of the wind. Finn led the horse inside, then helped Theresa down. They were both soaked to the skin, Theresa's dress clinging to her body and her hair hanging in wet ropes down her back. Finn looked away quickly, giving her privacy as he busied himself with the horse. "There should be some old wood in the corner if it is still dry," he said. "I will see if I can get a fire going." He managed to coax a small fire to life in what remained of the fireplace, and soon the soddy was filled with warmth and the smell of wood smoke. Theresa stood close to the flames, trying to dry her dress, acutely aware of how the wet fabric revealed every curve of her body. When she glanced at Finn, she found him studiously looking anywhere but at her, a faint flush creeping up his neck. "You should get out of that dress," he said, his voice rough. "You will catch a chill. I have a spare shirt in my saddlebag that will be big on you, but at least it is dry." He retrieved the shirt and handed it to her, then turned his back to give her privacy. Theresa hesitated only a moment before peeling off the wet dress and pulling on Finn's shirt. It fell to her knees, the sleeves hanging past her hands, and it smelled like him, like leather and prairie air and something indefinably masculine that made her feel safe. "You can turn around now," she said softly. When Finn turned and saw her in his shirt, something shifted in his expression, something heated and hungry that he quickly tried to hide. But Theresa had seen it, and it sent a thrill through her that was equal parts terrifying and exhilarating. Samuel had looked at her with lust, with possession, but never with the kind of reverent wonder she saw in Finn's eyes before he looked away. They hung Theresa's dress near the fire to dry and settled in to wait out the storm. The rain showed no signs of letting up, drumming steadily on what remained of the roof, water dripping through holes to pool on the dirt floor. Finn sat with his back against the wall, his wet shirt clinging to his broad shoulders and chest, and Theresa found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He was handsome in a rugged, unpolished way, with strong features and hands that looked like they could be gentle or fierce depending on what the situation required. "Can I ask you something personal?" Theresa said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Sure. Have you ever been married?" "Or close to it?" Finn shook his head. "No, I have been focused on work, on saving money. I always figured I would settle down when I found the right woman, but I have not met her yet." He looked at Theresa, his storm-gray eyes intense in the firelight. "What about you?" "I mean, I know you were married, but before that. Did you love him when you married him?" Theresa considered the question. "I thought I did. He was charming when we were courting, said all the right things. My father had just died and I was alone and scared, and Samuel seemed like a safe harbor. But the moment we were married, everything changed. It was like he had been wearing a mask, and once he had me trapped, he took it off." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I have not loved him for a long time. Maybe I never really did." "You deserve better," Finn said fiercely. "You deserve someone who will treat you like you are precious, who will protect you instead of hurting you." "Maybe," Theresa said quietly. "Or maybe I am better off alone. At least then I cannot make the same mistake twice." "Being with the wrong person was the mistake," Finn said. "Not loving someone. Do not let what he did make you afraid of what could be." The intensity in his voice made Theresa look up, and she found Finn watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. There was something building between them, something that had started the moment he had stopped on the road and had been growing with every mile they traveled together. Theresa knew she should be wary, knew she should protect her heart, but Finn was not Samuel. Finn was kind and gentle and everything Samuel had never been. "Finn," she whispered, and she was not even sure what she was asking for, but he seemed to understand. He crossed the small space between them, moving slowly as if afraid of startling her, and sat down beside her. "Tell me to stop," he said quietly, "and I will. Tell me you do not want this, and we will never speak of it again." But Theresa did not want him to stop. She wanted this, wanted him, with an intensity that surprised her. So instead of pulling away, she leaned in, closing the distance between them until their lips met in a kiss that was tentative and sweet and full of promise. Finn's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing gently over her bruised cheekbone, his touch so different from Samuel's that it made tears spring to her eyes. The kiss deepened, growing more urgent, and Theresa felt something inside her that had been frozen for years begin to thaw. This was what it was supposed to feel like, she realized. This warmth, this tenderness, this sense of being cherished rather than owned. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Finn rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that since yesterday," he admitted. "Since the moment I saw you standing in the road looking so brave and lost at the same time." "I am glad you did," Theresa whispered. "I am glad you stopped. I am glad for all of it." They spent the rest of the evening wrapped in each other's arms, talking and kissing and discovering the simple joy of being close to another person without fear. The rain continued outside, but inside the soddy, it felt like they had carved out a small piece of heaven, a place where the past could not reach them, and the future was full of possibilities. When they finally fell asleep, it was tangled together in Finn's bedroll, Theresa's head pillowed on his chest, his arm wrapped protectively around her. And for the first time in her adult life, Theresa felt like she had come home. They reached Fort Larn the following evening, just as the sun was setting behind the fort's wooden walls. The settlement that had grown up around it was a bustling collection of buildings, including a general store, a saloon, a church, and several homes. Finn guided the horse toward a two-story structure with a sign that read Patterson's Boarding House, in neat black letters. Martha Patterson turned out to be a formidable woman in her 50s with sharp eyes, and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Theresa of her own mother. She took one look at Theresa's bruised face and the way she was wearing Finn's shirt under her still damp dress, and seemed to understand the situation immediately. "You need a room and a job," Martha said, and it was not a question. "Yes, madam," Theresa said. "I can cook and clean and sew." "I will work hard." "I am sure you will." Martha looked at Finn. "And you?" "I am looking for work too," Finn said. "Ranch work, cattle, horses, anything honest." "Talk to James Crawford at the ranch 5 miles north of here," Martha said. "He is always looking for good hands. Tell him I sent you." She turned back to Theresa. "Come on then. Let me show you your room. You look like you could use a hot bath and a decent meal." Finn caught Theresa's hand before she followed Martha inside. "I will be back tomorrow," he promised. "After I talk to Crawford, I am not leaving you." "I know," Theresa said, and she did know. Whatever was happening between them, it was real and it was worth holding on to. The room Martha showed her was small but clean, with a real bed and a window that looked out over the settlement. After Martha left, Theresa sank onto the bed and let out a shaky breath. She had done it. She had escaped Samuel, had found a place where she could start over, and against all odds, she had found someone who made her believe in the possibility of love again. True to his word, Finn returned the next day with news that Crawford had hired him on at the ranch. Over the following weeks, he visited Theresa whenever his work allowed, and their relationship deepened from tentative attraction to something profound and unshakable. Theresa thrived at the boarding house, her natural warmth and efficiency making her indispensable to Martha, who began to treat her less like an employee and more like a daughter. But the shadow of Samuel still loomed. Theresa knew he would not simply let her go, knew that his pride, if nothing else, would drive him to search for her. She jumped at loud noises, flinched when men raised their voices, and lay awake some nights wondering if the next day would be the day he found her. It was early June when Samuel Everett finally rode into the settlement, asking questions about a woman matching Theresa's description. Word reached Theresa through one of Martha's other boarders, and she felt the familiar terror rise in her throat like bile. Finn was at the ranch when he heard the news, but he rode back immediately, arriving at the boarding house with his jaw set and determination in his eyes. He found Theresa in the kitchen, her hands shaking as she tried to peel potatoes. "He is here," she whispered. "Finn, he is here and he is going to take me back." "No," Finn said firmly, taking her trembling hands in his. "He is not. I will not let him." "He is my husband," Theresa said, the words bitter on her tongue. "Legally, he has every right to me." "The hell he does," Finn growled. "You are not property, and if he tries to take you, he will have to go through me first." The confrontation came that evening when Samuel tracked Theresa to the boarding house. He burst through the front door, his face red with anger, his eyes wild. He looked older than Theresa remembered, harder, his mouth twisted into an ugly sneer. "There you are, you ungrateful bitch," Samuel spat. "I have been searching for you for weeks. Do you have any idea what you have put me through?" Theresa stepped back instinctively, but Finn moved to stand between her and Samuel, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "You need to leave," Finn said quietly, his voice laced with barely controlled fury. "Who the hell are you?" Samuel demanded. "This is between me and my wife." "She is not going anywhere with you," Finn said. "Now get out before this gets ugly." Samuel laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You think you scare me, Cowboy. That is my wife. She belongs to me and I am taking her home." "I am not going with you, Samuel," Theresa said, forcing strength into her voice even though she was shaking. "I am not your wife anymore, not in any way that matters." Samuel's face darkened and he took a step forward. "You do not get to make that choice. You made vows." "And you broke them every time you hit me," Theresa shot back. "Every time you hurt me, every time you made me afraid in my own home. I owe you nothing." Samuel lunged for her, but Finn was faster. He grabbed Samuel by the collar and slammed him against the wall, his forearm pressed against Samuel's throat. "You are done," Finn said, his voice deadly calm. "You are done hurting her, done scaring her, done having any claim on her life. You are going to leave this settlement and you are never going to come back, because if you do, if you ever come near her again, I will make sure you regret it." "You cannot threaten me," Samuel wheezed, struggling against Finn's hold. "That is not a threat," Finn said. "That is a promise." He released Samuel, who staggered back, gasping for air. For a moment, it looked like Samuel might try to fight, but then he seemed to register the cold fury in Finn's eyes, the way his hand hovered near his gun, and thought better of it. "You are going to regret this," Samuel said, pointing a shaking finger at Theresa. "Both of you." "The only thing I regret is not leaving you sooner," Theresa said, and she meant every word. Samuel left, and though Theresa feared he might return with the law or with violence, days passed and he did not come back. Word eventually filtered through that he had returned to independence, telling people his wife had died of fever. For Theresa, it was a strange kind of freedom. She was dead to him, dead to her old life, and that meant she could truly begin again. The summer passed in a haze of work and courtship. Finn spent every free moment with Theresa, and she fell more in love with him with each passing day. He was everything Samuel had not been: patient, kind, respectful of her boundaries and her fears. He courted her properly, with flowers picked from the prairie and long walks under the stars, with quiet conversations and stolen kisses that made her heart race. In August, Finn asked her to marry him. They were sitting by a creek near Crawford's ranch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, when he took her hand and said, "I know it has not been long, and I know you have every reason to be cautious, but I love you, Theresa. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that not all men are like him, that love does not have to hurt." Theresa looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but honesty and hope. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in September in the small church at the settlement, with Martha as Theresa's witness and James Crawford standing up for Finn. It was a simple ceremony, nothing like the elaborate wedding she had had with Samuel, but it was perfect because it was real. When Finn kissed her at the altar, Theresa felt the last chains of her past fall away, leaving her free to embrace the future they would build together. Finn used his savings to buy a small parcel of land near the ranch, and they built a modest house together, working side by side to create a home that was truly theirs. Theresa continued to help Martha at the boarding house, and Finn worked at Crawford's ranch, and together they carved out a life that was simple but rich with love and purpose. In the spring of 1877, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. The news terrified her at first because it meant being vulnerable in a way she had not been since leaving Samuel. But Finn was so overjoyed, so tender in his excitement, that her fear gradually transformed into cautious hope. Their son was born in December, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, and Theresa marveled at the tiny perfect creature she had created, at the fierce protectiveness that surged through her the first time she held him. Finn was a devoted father, gentle and patient with Thomas in a way that made Theresa fall even more deeply in love with him. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and work was scarce. But through it all, Theresa and Finn faced every challenge together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing year. Theresa never forgot the terror of her first marriage, never took for granted the gift of a partner who treated her with respect and tenderness. And she made sure Thomas grew up knowing what real love looked like. In 1879, they welcomed a daughter they named Grace, and 2 years after that, another son they called Daniel. Their little house rang with laughter and the chaos of children, and Theresa sometimes had to pinch herself to believe this was her life, that she had gone from the nightmare of her marriage to Samuel to this beautiful, messy, perfect reality. Martha Patterson became like a mother to Theresa, and when Martha passed away in 1883, she left the boarding house to Theresa, knowing it would be in good hands. Theresa and Finn ran it together, Theresa managing the day-to-day operations while Finn handled repairs and expansion. They turned it into one of the most successful establishments in the settlement, known for its cleanliness, good food, and the genuine warmth with which they treated every guest. On a warm evening in May of 1886, 10 years to the day after Theresa had walked out of Independence with nothing but a carpetbag and desperate hope, she and Finn sat on the porch of their now expanded home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 8, Grace was 7, and Daniel was 5, and they were everything Theresa had never dared to dream of during those dark years with Samuel. "You ever think about that day I found you on the road?" Finn asked, his arm around Theresa's shoulders. "All the time," Theresa admitted, leaning into his warmth. "I think about how different my life would be if you had not stopped, how different I would be." "I think you would have been fine," Finn said. "You were already running, already fighting for yourself. You did not need me to save you." "Maybe not," Theresa said, turning to look at him. "But I needed you to remind me what love was supposed to be. I needed you to show me that I deserved better, and I needed you to give me this." She gestured to the children, to the house, to the life they had built. "I love you, Finn Quinlan. I have loved you since the moment you handed me that canteen and asked when I had last eaten." Finn kissed her, slow and sweet, and Theresa felt the same thrill she had felt in that abandoned soddy all those years ago. Some things never changed, no matter how much time passed. "I love you too," Finn murmured against her lips. "Always have, always will." As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Theresa Quinlan sat surrounded by everything she had ever wanted and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The girl who had fled independence with one dress and a heart full of fear was gone, replaced by a woman who had found her strength, her purpose, and her home in the arms of a cowboy who had stopped when others would have ridden past. And that, Theresa thought as she watched her children laugh and play, as she felt the solid warmth of her husband beside her, was the greatest freedom of all. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of a life well lived. The boarding house prospered under Theresa and Finn's management, becoming a landmark in the growing settlement that was slowly transforming from a frontier outpost to a proper town. They expanded the building in 1887, adding 6 more rooms to accommodate the increasing number of travelers passing through on their way to new homesteads and opportunities further west. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and spent hours reading everything he could get his hands on. Theresa saw herself in him sometimes, in the way he seemed to carry the weight of the world on his young shoulders, and she made sure to remind him that he was allowed to be a child, to play and make mistakes, and not take everything so seriously. Finn taught him to ride and rope and shoot, practical skills for frontier life, but also encouraged his love of learning, saving money to buy him books from traveling merchants. Grace was pure sunshine, always laughing, always making friends with everyone she met. She had Finn's easy charm and Theresa's determination, a combination that made her utterly irresistible and occasionally exhausting. She declared at age 9 that she was going to be a doctor when she grew up, and neither Theresa nor Finn had the heart to tell her how difficult that would be for a woman. Instead, they encouraged her dreams and taught her that she could be anything she was willing to work for. Daniel was their wild child, always getting into scrapes and adventures, coming home with torn clothes and scraped knees and stories about the creek or the fields or whatever expedition he had undertaken that day. He had Finn's fearlessness and Theresa's stubborn refusal to give up, and Theresa spent many evenings patching him up while Finn tried unsuccessfully to hide his amusement. In 1888, Theresa discovered she was pregnant again, much to her surprise. She was 33 and had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but life had other plans. The pregnancy was more difficult than her previous ones, leaving her exhausted and sick for months. But in March of 1889, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Hope. "She is perfect," Finn whispered, holding the tiny bundle with the same awe he had shown with their first child. "Just like her mother." "You say that about all of them," Theresa teased, though her heart swelled with love. "Because it is true every time," Finn replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "You have given me everything, Theresa, everything I never knew I wanted." Hope's arrival seemed to complete their family in a way none of them had anticipated. The older children doted on their baby sister, Thomas reading to her, Grace helping with feedings, and Daniel appointed himself her protector, warning anyone who came near that they had better be nice to his sister or else. The settlement continued to grow and change around them. The railroad came through in 1890, bringing with it an influx of new settlers and businesses. The fort was decommissioned, its military presence no longer needed as the frontier became more settled, but the town that bore its name continued to thrive. Theresa and Finn found themselves pillars of the community, respected and admired for their hard work and generosity. Theresa sometimes thought about Samuel, though the memories had lost their power to hurt her. She heard through the grapevine that he had remarried, and then divorced, that he had drunk himself into debt and ill health. She felt a distant pity for him, for the wasted life he had chosen, but mostly she felt grateful that she had escaped when she did, that she had been brave enough to walk away even when it seemed impossible. In the summer of 1892, a woman arrived at the boarding house, her face bruised, her eyes full of fear. She reminded Theresa so much of herself at 20 that it took her breath away. The woman's name was Clara, and she had fled from a husband in Colorado who beat her. Theresa took her in without hesitation, gave her a room and a job and a safe place to heal. She told Clara her own story, not to frighten her but to give her hope, to show her that there was life after escape, that the terror and pain did not have to define her forever. "You are so strong," Clara said one evening as they sat together in the kitchen, preparing dinner for the boarding house guests. "I do not know if I can be like you." "You already are," Theresa said firmly. "You left. That was the hardest part. Everything else is just taking it one day at a time." Clara stayed with them for 6 months, and in that time, Theresa watched her transform from a frightened, broken woman to someone who could hold her head high and believe in her own worth. When Clara eventually decided to move to Denver where she had family, Theresa sent her off with enough money for the train fare and a promise that she always had a home with the Quinlans if she needed it. "You did a good thing," Finn said that night as they lay in bed, Theresa's head on his chest, his fingers running through her hair. "I just did what someone did for me," Theresa said. "You gave me a chance at a new life. The least I can do is give that to someone else." Over the years, there were other women like Clara. Word seemed to spread somehow that Patterson's boarding house, now officially renamed Quinlan's boarding house, was a safe place for women running from bad situations. Theresa helped them all, gave them work and shelter and the benefit of her experience, and sent them out into the world stronger than when they had arrived. In 1895, Thomas left for college in Kansas City, his education funded by years of Theresa and Finn's careful saving. It was the first time any member of the Quinlan family had pursued higher education, and Theresa cried with pride as she watched her serious, bookish son board the train that would take him to his future. He wrote home every week, letters full of his studies and his plans to become a lawyer so he could help people who had no one else to fight for them. Grace, true to her childhood declaration, began studying medicine with the town's doctor, a progressive man who believed women made excellent physicians. It was unconventional, and many in the town disapproved, but Theresa and Finn supported her completely, proud of their daughter's determination to blaze her own trail. Daniel decided ranching was his calling and went to work full-time for Crawford's ranch when he turned 18. He was a natural with horses and cattle, and Crawford joked that he was going to have to make Daniel a partner if he did not want to lose him to another outfit. Hope, their youngest, grew into a bright, curious child who showed an early talent for music. Finn bought her a second-hand piano from a family moving east, and the boarding house was often filled with the sound of Hope practicing scales and simple melodies. In the spring of 1898, Theresa and Finn celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. They closed the boarding house for the evening and had a party with just their family and closest friends. James Crawford, now in his 70s, gave a toast about the day Finn had shown up at his ranch looking for work, and how he had known immediately that this was a man in love with a purpose. "I told him he could have any job on the ranch as long as he promised not to let that woman get away," Crawford said, raising his glass. "Best decision I ever made, hiring him, and clearly the best decision he ever made, marrying Theresa." "Hear, hear," chorused the assembled guests. Later, when everyone had gone home and the children were in bed, Theresa and Finn sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. 15 years, Theresa mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both, Finn said. It is both. Every day with you feels new, but also like you have always been part of my life. You saved me, Theresa said quietly. I know you do not like when I say that, but it is true. Not just physically, though you did that too. You saved me from believing that Samuel's version of love was all I deserved. You showed me what it was supposed to be. Finn turned to look at her, his storm-gray eyes still as intense as they had been that day on the road. You saved me right back, he said. I was drifting before I met you, just moving from job to job with no real purpose. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something real. You gave me a family and a home and a life worth living. They kissed under the stars, and Theresa felt the same flutter of excitement she had felt in that first kiss in the abandoned soddy. Some things never faded, no matter how many years passed. The turn of the century brought new challenges and changes. The frontier era was ending, the wildness that had defined the West for so long being tamed by civilization and progress. There were telephones now in the larger cities, and automobiles, though Finn declared he would stick with horses for as long as he lived. The boarding house installed indoor plumbing in 1901, a modern convenience that made Theresa's work significantly easier. Thomas returned from college in 1899 with his law degree and opened a practice in town, specializing in cases involving women and children. He married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth in 1902, and they gave Theresa and Finn their first grandchild, a boy they named Finn after his grandfather, in 1903. Grace completed her medical studies and became the first female doctor in the county, despite significant opposition from some quarters. She set up practice next to Thomas's law office, and the two siblings worked together to help the most vulnerable members of their community. Grace never married, declaring she was too busy with her work to bother with romance, though Theresa suspected there was more to the story. Daniel married his sweetheart, a rancher's daughter named Sarah, in 1900, and they took over Crawford's ranch when the old man retired in 1904. They had 3 children in quick succession, filling the old ranch house with noise and laughter. Hope showed no interest in settling down, much to Theresa's amusement. She left for Chicago in 1905 to study music at a conservatory, determined to see more of the world than the Kansas prairie. Her letters were full of excitement about the city, the concerts, the opportunities. As Theresa entered her 50s, she began to slow down, her body showing the wear of years of hard work and 4 pregnancies. Finn, now in his 50s as well, still worked at the ranch but had taken on more of a supervisory role, his experience valued even as his body could not do what it once had. They hired help to manage the boarding house, a young couple who reminded Theresa of herself and Finn in the early days. They trained the couple carefully, teaching them not just the practical aspects of running the business but the philosophy behind it. Treat everyone with respect, offer help to those who need it, create a place where people feel safe and welcome. In 1908, on a crisp October morning, Theresa stood on the porch of the boarding house and looked out at the town that had grown up around them. It was hard to believe this was the same small settlement she had arrived at all those years ago, broken and afraid. The town had a proper main street now, with brick buildings and electric lights. There was a bank, a newspaper office, 3 churches, and 2 schools. The Wild West of her youth was gone, replaced by something more settled and civilized. She did not mourn its passing. The frontier had given her freedom, had allowed her to reinvent herself, but it had also been harsh and unforgiving. This new world, with its modern conveniences and social progress, was one where her grandchildren could dream even bigger than she had dared to. Finn came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything," Theresa said. "That day on the road, how scared I was, how you stopped when you could have just kept riding. How all of this," she gestured to encompass the town, their life, everything they had built, "came from that one moment." "Best moment of my life," Finn said. "Seeing you standing there, knowing you needed help. I fell in love with you right then, though I did not realize it at the time." "I was a mess," Theresa laughed. "You were beautiful," Finn corrected. "You were brave and scared and determined all at once, and I could not stop thinking about you. Still cannot, actually. 32 years later, and you are still the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about before I sleep." Theresa turned in his arms so she could see his face. There were lines around his eyes now, gray in his hair, but he was still her Finn, still the man who had offered her water and jerky and a ride to freedom. "I love you," she said. "More than words can say. You gave me everything, Finn. Everything." "We gave it to each other," Finn said, and kissed her softly. They stood there for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the world go by. They had built a good life, raised good children, helped countless people, and loved each other fiercely through it all. It was more than Theresa had ever dreamed possible during those dark days in Independence, more than she had thought she deserved. But she had learned, over the years, that love was not something you earned or deserved. It was something you chose, every day, to give and receive. And she and Finn had been choosing each other, over and over again, since that day on the dusty road when a cowboy had stopped for a woman in trouble and changed both their lives forever. The years continued their gentle march forward, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. In 1910, James Crawford passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 87. Daniel and Sarah named their fourth child, a boy, James in his honor. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county, a testament to the impact Crawford had made on the community. Theresa and Finn mourned him deeply. He had been more than just Finn's employer. He had been a friend, a mentor, a father figure. At the wake, Finn raised a glass and told the assembled mourners about how Crawford had given him a chance when he needed one, had never asked questions about why Finn needed to stay near Fort Larned instead of heading to Kansas, as originally planned. "He knew," Finn said, his voice rough with emotion. "He figured out I was in love before I fully admitted it to myself, and he helped me build the life I needed to deserve her." He looked at Theresa, his eyes shining. "I will be grateful to him for that until the day I die." In 1912, Thomas made them proud by successfully arguing a case before the state Supreme Court, establishing legal precedent that made it easier for women to leave abusive marriages. Theresa sat in the gallery and watched her son eloquently defend a woman in a situation much like her own had been, and felt a profound sense of completion. Her suffering had not been meaningless. It had led her here to this life, and had shaped her son into someone who fought for justice. Hope returned from Chicago in 1913 with a fiancé, a fellow musician named Robert who played violin. They married that summer in a ceremony that featured more music than anyone in the town had ever heard at a wedding, with Hope on piano and Robert on violin, accompanied by musician friends they had brought from the city. It was unconventional and beautiful, much like Hope herself. Grace finally revealed the reason for her reluctance to marry when she introduced the family to Rebecca, a woman she had met at a medical conference and fallen in love with. It was 1914, and such relationships were not widely accepted. But Theresa and Finn loved their daughter and wanted her happiness above all else. They welcomed Rebecca into the family with open arms, though they understood when Grace and Rebecca decided to move to San Francisco, where they could live more openly. "I was so afraid to tell you," Grace confessed to Theresa the night before she and Rebecca left for California. "I know what it is like to love someone the world tells you that you should not," Theresa said, thinking of how society had said she should stay with Samuel, should honor her vows despite his abuse. "I just want you to be happy, sweetheart. If Rebecca makes you happy, then that is all that matters." By 1915, Theresa and Finn had 8 grandchildren, with more on the way. Their house had long since become too small for family gatherings, so they held them at the boarding house, taking over the dining room and spilling out into the yard. Theresa loved watching her children and grandchildren interact, loved seeing the family they had created flourishing and growing. In the spring of 1916, Theresa fell ill with pneumonia. She fought it hard, but at 61, her body was not as resilient as it once had been. For weeks she lay in bed, drifting in and out of fever dreams, aware of Finn's constant presence at her bedside, of her children taking turns sitting with her, of grandchildren leaving flowers and drawings to cheer her. In her fevered state, she sometimes thought she was back in Independence, trapped with Samuel, and she would wake crying out for help. But then Finn would be there, taking her hand, murmuring that she was safe, that he had her, that everything was going to be all right. And she would remember where she was, who she was, all that she had built and become, and the fear would recede. She recovered slowly, though the illness left her weaker than before. Finn retired completely from ranch work to care for her, and they spent their days on the porch, watching the world go by, sharing memories and stories, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. "You have any regrets?" Finn asked one afternoon as they sat watching a summer storm roll across the prairie. Theresa considered the question carefully. "I regret that I did not leave Samuel sooner," she said. "I regret the time I wasted being afraid, but I do not regret the journey because it led me to you. And I do not regret anything that came after I met you." "Not even the hard times?" Finn asked. "The years when money was tight, when we were not sure we could make it?" "Especially not those," Theresa said. "Those times showed me what we were made of, showed me that we could weather any storm as long as we were together." In the fall of 1916, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them and a simple dinner. They had long since stopped needing grand gestures or elaborate celebrations. Being together was enough. The Great War was raging in Europe, and though America had not yet entered the conflict, they could feel its distant tremors. Thomas and Daniel both had sons who were of age to fight if it came to that, and the thought filled Theresa with dread. She had lived through enough violence, had escaped one kind of war only to face the possibility of another. But she tried not to let fear rule her. She had learned over the decades that fear was a thief that stole joy and peace. So instead, she focused on what she could control: loving her family, helping those in need, cherishing each day with Finn. In 1917, America entered the war, and Thomas's eldest son, young Finn, enlisted immediately. Theresa held her grandson before he left, memorizing his face, and made him promise to come back to them. He swore he would, and she chose to believe him. The war years were difficult, marked by worry and rationing and the constant fear that came with having a loved one in danger. But in November of 1918, young Finn returned home, having survived the trenches and the gas and the horrors of modern warfare. The entire family gathered to welcome him, and Theresa held him and wept with relief. The 1920s brought a new era of prosperity and change. Women got the vote in 1920, and Theresa cast her first ballot with a sense of profound satisfaction. She thought of all the women she had helped over the years, all the women who had been powerless in their own lives, and felt that this small act of civic participation was a victory for all of them. Hope and Robert had 2 children, both musically gifted like their parents. Daniel and Sarah's children were taking over more of the ranch operation, preparing for the day when it would be fully theirs. Thomas's practice continued to grow, and he had taken on 2 junior associates to help with the workload. Grace and Rebecca opened a medical practice in San Francisco that specifically served women and children, and their letters spoke of the satisfaction they found in their work. In 1924, Theresa and Finn celebrated their 39th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. It was a boisterous, joyful celebration that left them both exhausted but deeply happy. 39 years, Finn mused that night as they prepared for bed. Almost 4 decades since I found you on that road. Best day of my life, Theresa said, brushing out her hair, which was now more gray than dark. Well, one of them. There have been so many good days. Finn came up behind her and took the brush from her hand, continuing the motion himself as he had done countless times over the years. What was the very best day? He asked. Theresa thought about it. I do not think I can choose just one. The day we met was the day I got my life back. Our wedding day was the day I learned what real love felt like. The days our children were born were miracles. Every day we have been together has been the best day in its own way. That is a good answer, Finn said, setting down the brush and wrapping his arms around her. I love you, Theresa Quinlan. I love you too, Finn Quinlan, she replied, meeting his eyes in the mirror. Always have, always will. In 1926, 50 years after Theresa had walked out of independence with one dress and a desperate hope for freedom, the family threw a massive celebration. It was not an anniversary, not exactly, but a jubilee of sorts, commemorating 5 decades of life and love and survival. They held it at the ranch, now run entirely by Daniel and his children, with enough space for everyone. All of Theresa and Finn's children came, along with their spouses and children, and even a few grandchildren who were old enough to bring dates. Friends and neighbors came, people whose lives Theresa and Finn had touched over the years, women Theresa had helped and their families. Thomas stood up to give a speech, his voice carrying across the crowd. My mother does not like to talk about the past much, he said. She has always been more focused on the present, on what we can do today to make tomorrow better. But I think it is important on a day like this to acknowledge where she came from and what she has accomplished. He told the story, as much as he knew of it, of Theresa's escape and Finn's intervention, of their love story and the family they had built. My mother is the strongest person I know, Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. She took her broken pieces and built something beautiful. She turned her pain into purpose, and she taught all of us what real courage looks like. There was not a dry eye in the crowd by the time he finished. Theresa stood, Finn's hand in hers, and looked at the sea of faces before her, all the lives that had intersected with hers, all the love that had grown from that single act of bravery on a dusty Missouri morning. I am not going to pretend it was easy, Theresa said, her voice wavering but clear. There were days I wanted to give up, days I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But I had this man beside me, she squeezed Finn's hand, who never let me face anything alone, and together we built something worth having. So my advice to all of you, especially the young ones, is this. Do not settle for less than you deserve. Do not let fear keep you from living. And when you find someone who makes you feel safe and loved and cherished, hold on to them with everything you have. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Theresa and Finn danced under the stars, moving slowly to the music Hope played on her portable piano, and Theresa rested her head on Finn's chest and felt utterly, completely at peace. The years after the Jubilee were quieter. Theresa's health continued to decline gradually, her body simply wearing out after 7 decades of hard use. But her mind remained sharp, and she spent her days writing letters to her children and grandchildren, recording stories from her life so they would have them after she was gone. Finn's health began to fail in 1929, his heart growing weaker. The doctors said there was nothing to be done except make him comfortable. He and Theresa spent those final months as they had spent all their time together, talking and laughing and simply being in each other's presence. "I am not afraid," Finn told her one evening as they sat watching the sunset. "I have had a good life, the best life, because of you." "Do not talk like that," Theresa said, though she knew the time was coming. "You are going to be around to annoy me for years yet," Finn smiled. "Maybe, but if I am not, I need you to know that you made everything worthwhile. Every day with you was a gift." Finn Quinlan passed away peacefully in his sleep in October of 1929, with Theresa holding his hand. He was 78 years old and had lived a full, rich life surrounded by love. Theresa mourned him deeply, feeling like a part of her soul had been torn away. But she also felt grateful for the 48 years they had shared, for every moment of joy and struggle and ordinary domesticity. She lived for 4 more years without him, surrounded by her children and grandchildren who made sure she was never alone. She continued to help run the boarding house, though mostly in an advisory capacity, and she continued to offer sanctuary to women who needed it, carrying on the mission she and Finn had started together. In the spring of 1933, Theresa Quinlan passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 78. She was buried next to Finn in the town cemetery, under a simple headstone that read "Beloved Wife, Mother, Grandmother, and Friend." At her funeral, the church was packed with people whose lives she had touched. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of her courage and kindness and the legacy she had left behind. "My mother believed that love was the most powerful force in the world," he said. "Not the romantic love of fairy tales, though she and my father certainly had that, but the deeper love that shows up every day, that chooses to be kind even when it is hard, that helps even when there is nothing to gain. That is the love she lived by, and that is the love she taught us all." The family she and Finn had created continued to grow and flourish, generation after generation, each one carrying forward the lessons Theresa had taught them about courage and compassion and the transformative power of love. The boarding house operated for another 3 decades before finally closing in the 1960s, but the building stood as a monument to what Theresa and Finn had built. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie, old-timers would swear they could hear the sound of laughter coming from the old Quinlan place, the echo of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and loved each other fiercely until the very end. It was a story that became legend, passed down through generations, the story of how a cowboy had stopped on a dusty road and changed one woman's life, and how that woman had changed his right back, and together they had built something that would outlast them both. Their love story became the foundation upon which their entire family was built, a reminder that even in a time and place as harsh as the Wild West, kindness and courage could create miracles. And every time their descendants faced difficulty or doubt, they would remember Theresa's walk down that lonely road, Finn's decision to stop and help a stranger, and the beautiful life they had created from that single moment of compassion. It was proof that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to help, one person brave enough to leave, and two hearts willing to believe in the possibility of a better future. That was the legacy of Theresa and Finn Quinlan, and it lived on long after they were both gone, a testament to the enduring power of love in all its forms.